It's on the cameras.
Oh, I forgot. All right, let's call a roll.
Michael Spitzer.
Mark Kaplan.
Private.
Umair Khan for the public advocate.
John Grathwall, Mayor's representative.
Michelle Mark Levine, representing Comptroller Scott Stringer.
One more down on my left, huh?
Oh,
No.
Nicole Fleming, Office of Management Budget.
Okay. Then I take it we can do the minutes, okay?
Make a motion to accept the minutes.
Yep. Anybody have any comments or suggestions? I'll give you a few later, Jim. That's okay. Let's move on. Let's see what the next item is here. I guess the first one,
We only had a motion. Mike made a motion, we need a second.
we need a second on the minute.
Second.
Thank you very much. I forgot how formal we are here. I guess the first one on the agenda is the 34th Street Partnership. Is it here?
The next one,
Next
they're
one?
not,
Here,
The Brooklyn Navy Yard?
this will be the,
That- I have a different agenda here.
that was the one in the package. This is the
Oh,
one
good.
that's,
Thank goodness Bernie's here. Bernie,
All it would need, 5 minutes.
I wrote other audit committees, much less formal.
but they aren't filmed on the
No.
camera.
Look at liability.
Yeah. These are the ones that give every morning, every time we come, there's an agenda here. That's the official agenda.
Who's first here?
Brock,
What?
Brock.
We did the minutes, Bernie. We're up to, Brack.
Okay. You took the roll?
Yes, we
Yep.
if those here for the Business Relocation Assistance Corporation Authority, please take a seat at the table. Thank you.
You did the
Please
thing.
go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Donald Giampetro, Assistant
Why don't
Commi-
you introduce yourselves, and if you have a little statement, it'll be fine.
Sure. Donald Giampetro, Department of Small Business Services, Assistant Commissioner. Can you hear me? Okay, now. Donald Giampetro, Assistant Commissioner of Business Incentives at SBS. Just and we'll go through and then I'll come back.
Shazad Ali, Assistant Commissioner of Small Business Services.
Yeah, Ismail Mohammed, Executive Director for Budget, SBS.
Angelito Balo and Company, we did the audit.
Hello and Company?
Yeah.
Basically, more here. It may be our last. It's the business.
Go ahead, sir.
Business Relocation Assistance Corporation, which in the 80s and 90s was developed to oversee loft conversion and exact conversion fees, which were infused into different programs for relocation grants throughout the last 2 decades. Based on recommendations from this body and others, we actually, during the last year, have initiated the dissolution of the corporation currently. And and filings have been placed with the Attorney General's office towards that end.
So basically, there's no revenue. You're just providing the,
True, there is no revenue to BRAC. We, as you know, for the past few years, we've been spending down that until this point.
and there's still a need you feel for your services. People are still coming in.
Oh, definitely, especially now. It's funny, after, in 2008, the economy dipped and some businesses were not being displaced at the same level. However, there has been an uptick, especially in certain areas of Brooklyn and the meatpacking district. So there have been, and so they come with general questions regarding relocation, and we're able to allow them to access SBS's full portfolio of business relocation services, which is branded Business Solutions for the city. And we had two remaining Greenpoint grants under the Greenpoint Relocation Program last fiscal year, which we initiated and closed out
So you're busy in areas where there was a lot of gentrification,
Very much so, yes, yes.
as I recall, and I don't have much, there was much here
Well,
at all.
there are things in the
Go ahead.
language that I think you need to look at. You talk about, on page 3, operating deficit. What do you mean by an operating? What's the difference between a deficit and operating deficit?
I'll defer to the fiscal officers.
We meant that there is no revenue coming in, except that there are, expenses that going out. So we, as a result, we have a deficit, but we have a surplus from prior years. So we are using our surpluses from prior years to.
Oh, I understand that. I just didn't understand what an operating deficit was. You might want to look at that. Then you got some more stuff here. That on page 4, you talk about the fact that the decrease in current liabilities result of paid liabilities for prior year and the unpaid audit fee for 2015. I thought you couldn't issue an audit report unless you got your money. I want to get you guys paid.
And we still, did the audit, and we have to pay the accountant that
No, I
did the
understand.
audit.
No, but you should-
So as a result, we have to accrue the expenses in the fiscal report.
Okay, so they're getting paid.
Right, yes, yeah, definitely.
Now,
We are not gonna skip that.
we got some grammatical stuff, I'll give it to you. What on page 5 are referred to as incentives consultations?
As I was just speaking to Mr. Rosen, we have companies coming daily asking, either through phone or in-house, for an assessment of what benefits exist both at the federal, state, and city level if they're to relocate. So that's a consultation. And it's a term that SBS, the city's branding for, instead of site visit or meeting.
One couple more, Bernie.
No, take it.
There is, on one place here, you say that you exceed the FDIC $250,000. And on the next page, you say those deposits are collateralized. So, are you inconsistent there?
Yeah, you wanna answer that?
Which page are you referring
I'm
to,
looking
please?
at on page 13D, it says sometimes you exceed the $250,000 limit. And on the next page, you talk about the fact that when you do, you collateralize it. Those a little inconsistent?
Well, the 250,000 is the standard,
Oh, I understand what it is. I'm just
okay.
saying that the language on the, one place you say, let me say it again. You're subjected to concentration of credit and market risks because you exceed the FDIC $250,000. On the next page, you say that the excess is collateralized. So it's a little inconsistent. If it's collateralized, you don't have any risk.
we should have just said fully insured, I mean, not fully insured, but insured up to 250,000,
All right, I'm done. I'll give you
collateralized.
EDC manages you people?
No, we're in SBS, separate agency, totally
So
independent.
you manage yourselves?
Yes,
I see.
through, again, under the commissioner,
Sorry?
under the commissioner of SBS.
Under the,
The commissioner of SBS. Yeah, under the commissioner of SBS, we're, part of
By the way,
SBS.
I must congratulate you on one thing. I've had a running war with all the accounting firms, but the restrictive language that this is available only to the members of your company, whereas you say it's a public record and it's available to everybody.
well, sure.
It's, no, it is.
I guess the only question is, I'll just quickly ask, has there been any indication that you'd be getting additional revenue if you need it?
No, not at this juncture, no.
No. And, all right, and are there many companies that have needs for your services, or other than Greenpoint, it's kind of quiet?
Yes, there are companies. Typically, we're noticing there's a wave of new relocation, but some of the services are not what this program had provided. The need is not necessarily subsidizing relocation costs. It might be reducing energy costs, other operation costs, lowering real property taxes, et cetera.
I'm not gonna bother you with grammar, I'll give you this.
Okay.
So I guess you'll just continue to spend down, is
And,
this?
and we'll wait with the AG as to the process for,
Dissolution.
with the AG's office, the filing is with them to dissolve the corporation, and that'll take several months, it seems.
I wish you well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Here you go.
Thank you. Okay.
I know this is your last one.
Okay.
Actually, you will have a stub period until you finish the operation, so we'll see you again for
That's
at
what I
least a
think.
partial year.
Thank you so much. That's what I thought.
34th Street?
It's funny, you spoke from there, from my ear, it came out from the other side.
When I read it, I said, Mark's gonna be pleased.
There it is, good.
What?
Paid like 90,000 a year and you.
Which is next, Bernie?
Well, I'll get it later. It's not.
I wish the activists would.
How you doing?
Talking about the 77 days out.
The good old days.
Milk.
That's our Harvey Sussline. First day of work in this room. You may have been there.
I was. And Mark Shinikoff.
Chernikov, chief accountant. Dan Rose.
Right, the next agency is the 34th Street Partnership, one of the few bids we get to see. How will you introduce yourselves quickly?
Dan Biederman, president, Peter Cirillo, CFO, and from Cape.
Sergey Shkolny, manager, KPMG.
You are with KPMG, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I didn't hear it. Something is wrong with the mics, I think. Maybe it's my hearing.
No, I agree with you.
What? You agree with me?
I always agree with you.
So, what do you folks, do you have a little statement that you want to make, or?
Well, I always give you kind of a general view of,
That would be helpful.
thanks. 34th Street's probably the third or fourth biggest BID by assessment level and total budget. We're unusual in that we have bonds out, which were, took advantage of the city's triple tax exempt capability, and we built our own capital plant. So that's reflected in this. It's been refinanced a couple times. The general policy of this BID is to only increase the budget every third year or fourth year. So we've been steady state, sticking to our budget, not running over. Most of the effort, as you can see if you look closely at the program services, goes into the debt service on the capital bond issue I just mentioned, and then security and sanitation, cleaning the streets, and in the security area, policing the streets with unarmed guards who supplement NYPD, and the effect has been fantastic. Still a lot of little problems to solve, but crime has come down 90% since we started in 1992, and the streets are clean, and there's a great looking Capitol plant, which you should notice when you go through 34th Street. Notice how much brighter everything is. That those are our lampposts and signs that light up, and the rest. And biggest components of our effort are Madison Square Garden and Vornado, and the owners of the Empire State Building, Empire State Realty Trust. But there's 32 million square feet of real estate in the district. The only, once in a while, Bernie has asked me what is a big concern. The governor and the mayor's aspiration to go to $15 by 2018 could be a problem for us, but you should know a huge problem for the other BIDs, because most of the supplementary services that are provided by other BIDs, especially small ones, don't pay anywhere near that. We have some people over 15, but we have a lot under. It would be costly, but you don't see the other small BIDs because of your criteria.
Yeah, we does.
But that'll be a huge issue. It could put 25 or 30 out of the 74 BIDs out of business effectively. So it's not focused on in the race to comment on the thing in general, but that would be an issue. But other than that, we're financially secure, we feel.
Oh, very, very viable. Very viable.
Yeah, thank
Very
you.
viable,
Thank you.
yes,
So
there's no
that's-
question.
So Peter and Sergey can answer any more technical accounting questions. I can answer general budgeting.
I can, Bernie. There's a line in your contribution in lieu of assessments. So somebody contributes something and you value that, and that reduces the assessment obligation?
Garden, right?
It's Madison Square Garden makes a contribution, but they're tax exempt.
When we first arrived on the scene, we learned of the Koch administration deal, that they were tax exempt, took me by surprise. So we went to the garden and begged them to come in on the same basis that everybody else was, which was at the time, like 18 cents a foot. And we bludgeoned them into going 2/3 of the way to that, which also was a treatment that Macy's got, because Macy's was bankrupt at the time. Campo, the Canadian developer.
When was that?
I remember that.
Ruined them. So Macy's and the garden pay 2/3 of what everybody else pays. The garden voluntarily, Macy's, kind of talk about bludgeon, they bludgeoned us into it, saying, we're bankrupt, we'll kill this thing, we can't spend another penny. And that's the explanation of that line. Mark?
Your boundaries are a little different. You have Bryant Park,
That's a separate BID.
so you don't do that, or you run it.
We run it, but that.
It's not included here.
No, there's a separate set of books. KPMG also audits, but the reason we're not here, I think, is no public,
There's no public debt on that.
no public debt. So you
Uh-huh.
guys
No,
changed your
okay,
criteria.
okay, yeah, that was the rule that they set for the bids. If you don't have any debt outstanding, you don't have to come to us.
Where it used to be, you guys audited everybody over $1 million.
Something like
That
that.
changed. So there, Bryant Park isn't here represented today. It would be the same people, though.
Could I ask, I have one thing I couldn't understand here. I think it's a language problem in I on page 9. The language, the carrying amount of cash equivalents and accounts payable approximates fair value. I'm accustomed to seeing the first part, but accounts payable has to be marked at fair value? That means you have to go in, why is that? Is that appropriate here?
I guess it's because,
You have to speak up, sir. Speak in.
okay. It's because the payables, I think they mostly will be redeemed within 1 year. So because of the short maturity of the payables, they approximate fair value.
I don't know, I'm just not accustomed to seeing that language in anybody describing their payables. Your payables, you carry at par. You don't go into the market to decide whether your credit standing reduces your payable carrying value. I think you
Yeah, and
look at that.
Okay.
And you also refer to it as a financial instrument. And as far as I know, accounts payable are not financial instruments. I got another accounting question. I'll need help here.
It's fascinating, Mark, thank you. There's so much rigmarole.
I think he makes a good point. Go ahead.
There's so much rigmarole that the audit firms have introduced into the process because of criticism from outside, and a lot of times I feel it's angels dancing on the head of the pin, so.
I think
You're saying we're too complicated, but I'm sure KPMG got that from
Let's see
someone.
if you know, once I made a speech 25 years ago, in which I said, a few thousand years from now, people are going to compare 20th century accounting principles, the same theological argument, how many angels dance on the head of a pin. Neither were any relationship to reality.
It takes the partner on the account 25 minutes to go through all the stuff that's been loaded on in the last 10
Okay,
years.
well, let's...
As you can see, there are no zeros in this.
Let
We're
me
tiny.
ask another one. In the bonds payable, the unamortized issuance cost have been subtracted from the bonds payable, and you're amortizing, let me just get, unamortized premium is included in bonds payable. If you sell bonds at 103, you still only owe 100. Why are you taking the premium into a payable?
You can.
That's the new treatment.
No, you
Everything
can't.
is included.
Just deal with me for a minute, Bernie. I understand. If I sell a bond for 103, I get 103, but I only owe 100. So why do I include the payable for the 3?
Go ahead.
If you don't mind, Mr. Kaplan.
You've got to speak up. Something is wrong with the mics.
Yes, sir.
We can hear.
As the interest is paid on that debt, the premium will be amortized to reduce the effective interest rate. And that is why it is carried on the balance sheet in that manner. because the
the
cost of
monthly payable.
borrowing, the cost of borrowing is actually lower, right? So the way that the accounting works is that it gets put on the balance sheet as part of the liability, and then over time, it reduces the interest expense on the
So
debt.
if I sell a bond at 103,
bond, they're not
and
recognized
the
at
principal on the
1.7,
note says 100,
People
I now
complicate.
carry the liability 103?
Correct.
Boy, I really
For-
feel my ignorance, yeah.
And it gets slowly offset over the course of the life of the debt.
Basically, you're not recognizing the premium in the first year, you're amortizing it
Correct.
over the life.
Correct. It's not an upfront gain, it's a reduction of interest expense over time.
What's your boundaries again, while Mark is looking?
Generally 31st to 35th from Park to 10th, with some squiggles
Park
here and
to-
there. 10th Avenue.
10th Avenue.
Got 32 million square feet of real estate, of which most is office, but there's a little residential and some retail.
Are you going to move over now that 34th Street is being built up on the Hudson?
No, Related decided, obviously, since they own everything, they didn't need a BID, but north of them, on that new road that the city's plans created, there is something called the Hudson Yards, something BID, and small. They're running a few public spaces, and that'll grow, but they decided to do one on their own.
I ask out of self-interest because we're moving there.
Oh, yeah? Oh, it's happening.
So Hudson Yards, you're not involved at all with it?
Get ready for the different weather over there. in the
I'm
winter.
sorry?
The weather is different over there from the rest of Midtown Manhattan. It's quite challenging,
Riverside Drive is always that way.
very windy. It's always nice to see Bud and Bernie and Mike again. My first meeting in my career, it was here, June 20th, 1977, at 10 o'clock. And I sat over there.
You
and
remember?
Harvey Sussman was my boss, and he told me who Bernie was. He pointed him out. Mike, I'm sure, was at the meeting. It was a IFMIS crisis meeting.
Well,
I'm sure Bud was there.
Who was the software, what was it again?
It was AMS.
AMS, yeah.
Yeah, and
So-
Bernie, and Harvey Sussman, he came in and protested because he couldn't hear Sharkey, if you can imagine. Sharkey was sitting there ranting, and the air conditioner was so loud that my boss couldn't hear, so he said, "This is typical. They have the air conditioner so loud, nobody can hear."
intentional.
And it's Sharkey, he's the loudest guy in the world, and we can't hear him, so he came over, and I think he asked me,
It's
"Can we
hard to
turn the air
understand if you
conditioner
can
off?"
hear him, go ahead.
So, that was my first meeting. I was in awe of the people in this room. So.
You learned
I tell
that
this
since.
boring story every year, Michelle. Were you around at the time?
No, but I've been around since, and I haven't
No, she's still.
You're too young to have been in there in those years, but Bernie was a great boss for the consultants.
It was great years, huh?
He covered himself up against charges of sexual harassment by calling me Honey Bunch and Sweetie Pie.
Hey, just to let all the participants know, this is webcast.
And just as an aside,
I wasn't insulted.
Bill passed away last summer. I
Sorry to hear
I
that.
attended the funeral. A few of us did from OMB.
With Liz,
And
my favorite
no,
friend.
he was very, very good. He was
He was a
ill,
nice
but
guy.
The audit committee.
Underneath the bluster, he was.
I tell you, I've spoken to Michelle Levine about this. When you go back then and now, we're in the forefront of financial reporting in this government. And at that time, you couldn't. I always remember the very first OS we had to pull. All right. The controller people said this, the budget people said that. We could, it was almost impossible to get numbers, to stay still.
There were three sets of numbers. The
but
second
it-
month, Bud may remember this, the second month, city had borrowed 2.3 bill from the Treasury. There had to be a report on the last day, close of business, in the Assistant Treasury Secretary's desk, certifying the condition. We were responsible for producing it with the new computer system. 1 month we got behind. I was just telling the story out here. Lou Friedrich was the budget director, so he came.
No, he was a deputy, but he was.
Patted us in the back and said, "Good going, guys." We said, "Not good, Lou, we're behind." It was about 11 in the morning of the day. So he said, "Well, let me help." He sits down with a calculator and starts running numbers. And we were putting it together by hand because we had some deficits.
Amazing, no, it was
And I
just-
remember looking over at him at 1:15, and there was sweat dripping off his chin. And I said, "You look upset." And he said, I'm letting the pressure get to me, and I shouldn't do this. Because we technically would have been in default if the report didn't arrive on Altman, I think it was Roger Altman's desk.
Roger.
Yeah,
last
Bunker Hill.
day, close of business in Washington, and there was no fax, so you had to get on a plane with a physical report. Quip was the only thing that was.
They had an office treasury down here. They had to go with couriers. It was, and we paid interest. We paid the feds interest.
Yep.
All right.
Those are bad days, but,
Any other questions?
no, we'll let you go. But unless somebody else has any questions. What?
I want to move this along if you can.
Yeah. I was just going to say, after that, it was very easy to do OSs, but you couldn't get any numbers on that first OS. I couldn't believe it. And the questions in the things you had to answer was, how many city employees,
Yep.
certain financial information. After that, once we got going, it was a cinch to do an OS. It was a cinch to do a financial plan, but it took years and a lot of sweat. Thank you very much, Dan.
Great to
You're
see
doing
you
a
as
great
always.
job.
Take care,
Nice
Dan.
seeing you all.
Okay, thank
Okay. The Brooklyn Navy Yard, oh, yes. I sympathize with you, sir. I hurt you hurt yours, too?
Bone infection.
What?
Bone infection.
Okay. I fell.
Sorry to hear about Bill.
What can you do? No, they're doing very well. So, could you quickly introduce yourselves?
Surely.
Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm John Madonia, CFO of the Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation. This is my controller, Wimal Awansa, and this is Tunde Onije, partner at Dean's Archer, BNYDC's independent auditor.
How are you, sir? Good, thank you for coming. Okay.
BNYDC had a successful 2015. We realized an excess of operating revenue over operating expenses of $6.5 million after depreciation and amortization. Our current ratio is over 2.8, and our investment in property and equipment grew by $46 million. Much of that is investments in the Green Manufacturing Center, or GMC, and Building 77. The GMC, which came online at the end of fiscal 2015, is a 215,000 square foot industrial building that currently has leases for all 4 components. That was an overall cost of in excess of $63 million. Building 77, which was started at the end of 2013, will be an 18-story, 1 million square foot light industrial building. The overall cost is expected to be in excess of $170 million. It'll come online at the end of 2017, and BNYDC has secured one tenant for 4 of the floors. Our growth in 2015 was not just due to work being done by BNYDC. During fiscal 2015, BNYDC entered into agreements for 2 additional developments. The first with BP Rudin and Boston Properties, called Dock 72, will be a 650,000 square foot, 15-story new industrial and creative space building. It'll cost approximately $300 million and be online in calendar 2018. It is anchored by WeWork, who will be taking 225,000 square feet. We expect there to be over 4,000 jobs to be created. The second project, Admiral's Row, will house a 74,000 square foot Wegmans grocery store with 89,000 square feet of additional retail, topped by 127,000 square feet of light industrial space. In fiscal 2015, BNYDC received over $12 million in city capital funds, primarily for infrastructure improvements. We also received $8 million in federal and state sources, including $3.6 million from FEMA. Our FEMA pipeline includes over 20 projects at a cost in excess of $70 million.
Yeah. Most of the new buildings will actually be rented, right? For
Yes, sir.
manufacturing or other such things?
The 2 projects, we are doing land leases to. We are doing land leases to the developer, who will then they will lease the space.
They would use the space, the developers themselves?
No, the developers will lease them to their tenants.
Oh, they'll lease it to their tenants?
Right, for instance,
And they'll
Wegman.
pay you for using the...
Land.
I see, all right. That's a little different than most of the things you do.
Most of the things we do, we're the.
Direct, you do the
it's a
direct leasing. Okay.
lease.
And just very quickly, I remember your predecessor saying, and I guess it's okay now, you were paying a lot for water because there was leakage somewhere. You have a new system in the yard?
We rebuilt the water sewer infrastructure over the last 5 years.
And
it seems to be working much better, yes.
Sure. And you still have that cogeneration plant?
We still have the cogeneration
Can't get
plant.
rid of
They
it?
have, their lease is coterminous with ours. And we purchase up to 10 megawatts of power from them, which we then resell to our.
Do you buy all the power from them?
And resell it to our tenants.
To your tenants? They get a little break on it?
We give them a 10% discount.
Okay.
Below market.
Again, your predecessor hated the cogeneration plant, but he couldn't get rid of it. Who runs the cogeneration plant?
It's a company called Brooklyn Cogeneration Partners, and they are owned by a German conglomerate.
It's interesting. They do the job, you don't care.
That's pretty much it,
Yeah.
yes.
And the marine life and the water keeps eating the piers, right?
Yes, sir.
You can't help it.
Can't help it. And we
No,
keep,
but I
keep
really-
rebuilding them, though.
Really, you people, the yard has come a long way. I mean, you're so fully rented, and your revenue, it seems so solid. And I haven't been around the area in a long time,
You
but the
wouldn't
last time it
recognize
was
it,
beautiful.
Bernie. And I extended an invitation to anybody who would like to come out for a tour.
I couldn't do it. I walked through that yard when you were building ships there in the Second World War. That's my image of it.
No.
Listen, Bernie, I have.
Go, please.
Take a look at page 5. You got something missing here. The last paragraph, the sentence doesn't work. In our opinion, the information is the blank. See it?
Page 5.
Page 5, next to last paragraph.
Oh, next to last paragraph.
There's something that must have been wrong in the program.
Oh, I think there was just some missing words there. I will have
Something's
that
missing.
Yeah, all right, they'll correct
We'll
it.
correct it.
That's public documents. You want to get that fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, there's some other stuff here I couldn't quite. When you talk about fringe benefits, that's OPEB as well as,
Yes.
OPEB as well as the...
Yes.
as well as the insurance.
Yeah, well, they have their pensions as
No, I understand.
Well, they have,
We have
yeah,
our
yeah,
own-
pension.
our own
have their
pension.
own fund, yeah.
Okay. I got a couple more things, Bernie. if
Yeah,
I
no, I was just going to say,
What's tax ownership of the property? Refer on page 16 to something from B, and has tax ownership of the property. What does that mean?
I think that has to do with the setup of the tax credit of.
Well, I understand what you're saying is effectively it's your tax as if you owned the property. Just language I'm not accustomed to.
Oh, okay, all right.
It's not, at least it didn't say what you just said it did.
I want to thank that young woman for the...
I think it's for the purposes of securing the new market tax credits on that particular property.
Okay.
For the tax law, you have ownership.
Yes, Michelle.
I don't mean to interrupt
Are you
when you're
done,
done.
Mark?
Go ahead, I gotta
Gotta
find some
call
more
on Michelle.
pages.
On your consolidated statement of net assets, in the,
What page, Michelle?
I'm looking at page 11. Your accounts receivable in the prior year had a $4+ million allowance for doubtful accounts. This year, it's significantly lower. I'm just curious if you had a major write-off or a
Yes,
major recovery.
We had Building 25 which was rented to a company called Surround Art. They went out of business, and we were carrying that for.
They're the ones that declared the bankruptcy?
Yes.
You know, that's large enough that that's something I might have commented on in the MD&A.
Somehow I recollected last year it was in there.
No,
It was in there as an allowance for doubtful accounts. This year, they did the write-off. The bankruptcy obviously was finalized.
As long as we're on stuff like that, if you can turn to note 5, you have an interesting comment. Repayment is interest only, payable annually on the outstanding balance. Interest is not repayment. It's interest only until, and then, because later on you say it's only payable quarterly, but it doesn't say, you don't say, you say thereafter payment of principal and interest to maturity date.
it's a nice deal.
Now, does that mean there's no principal payment until maturity?
Correct.
That's a nice deal.
Well, this doesn't.
Normally, you wouldn't do it this way, right?
This is the way the tax credit.
No, I understand that, just the
Yeah.
language,
Yeah.
you know, that's the way it is.
No, normally, he does his own. all right.
The other thing caught my eye.
Again, on page 25, community development entities. These are these private landlords that you're talking about, sir?
No, sir. Community development entities are formed in order to flow historic tax credits through to us.
So that's why you're doing it this way?
Correct.
Handkerchief is.
All right, And these are the people that'll do their own rental?
No, sir. These are entities that exist in order to flow the investment from the tax credit investor to the yard so that they can recoup the tax credit.
So they can make use of it?
Of the tax credit?
Credit, yeah.
Yes. Next time I'll bring the flow chart. It's huge.
No, it's a little different than,
I was struck by the fact that on your note 16, the liability is capped at $50,000 per occurrence. Is that the liability? How do you cap liability?
no.
Oh, that's the cash cap for us. It's the deductible, basically.
So it's not the liability, it's the,
What they could be hit with.
It's the liability that we are responsible for any claim.
so this is effective deductible.
Correct.
So it's not the, because the way this reads, the liability is capped. It's really your
Deductibles, yeah.
different way.
On the next page, the New York City Regional Center, what is that entity?
That is an entity that's formed in order to make EB-5 loans to businesses that are qualify for the program, which is run through IC.
It's not a city agency?
No, sir.
It's a private agency?
It's a private entity.
And they do this and they get interest on their loans, et cetera, like any bank or?
They get fees, they get, yes.
I see.
How would they get the funds?
As long as I was on insurance. Go to page 29, you have property insurance. But you don't have liability insurance as an expense.
No, whoa.
Wouldn't that also be a line here somewhere?
No, you want to look at...
That's our total insurance. It's mislabeled.
So it's
It's insurance.
Yeah. And somewhere in your bad debts, you cover the cost of this bankruptcy, or, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Let me focus you once more on insurance part, which is that on page 30, you have director's liability insurance for $10,000.
So much.
In all the things I've ever sat on, that's the smallest premium I have ever seen. How much coverage are you buying for your directors with it?
I think we're buying as much as we can, but I'd have to get back to you on that.
Well, I'm just pointing out that I'm accustomed to seeing
More.
much bigger numbers to cover.
How many directors do you have, sir, on you?
The board of directors, I believe, is approximately 35 people.
It's a large board.
It's a large board.
And you're paying more for that insurance than $10,000.
You're paying.
Maybe not, maybe.
I don't think so, no.
Must not have a lot of insurance.
Can you get a quorum for your meetings with the 30? Well, what is it? It's hard to,
I think a quorum is 10.
10? All right. Otherwise, you'd get nothing done.
It's a million.
With 35. You couldn't be sure.
I just have one question on note 6, property and equipment,
Guess that explains it.
page 21. And on the line that says leasehold improvements, building, water, and sewer, there's a large jump from 14 to 15.
Yes.
And I wondered what the explanation for that large increase was.
That was largely investments in the Green Manufacturing Center and Building 77 over the course of the fiscal year.
So it was the incremental expenditure on that property,
Yes,
largely.
right, the big tickets.
So that was a lot of money. Okay. Is that identified somewhere else in here?
I do not believe so.
It might be worth explaining large changes
Changes?
in year-over-year numbers in your MD&A, or in this case, in the footnote.
Okay.
And every public.
Hard to hear.
Now,
I think I have to have my hearing checked. I really do. I guess I have no-
directors explaining any
I'm an old man.
so you don't have to play Sherlock Holmes. Management gives you the answer.
I guess
Shortens the meeting.
you're pretty fully rented, aren't you, sir?
Yes, sir.
And you still have that movie studio?
Oh, yes, we do. They're
And what do
still
they do,
expanding.
TV, or they do movies and TV?
They do movies, TV, commercials.
Yeah.
They have a post-production facility that they opened up in
Have everything.
an additional building, and we are in negotiations with them to take over 2 additional tracts of land.
And the only city funds you're getting now are the capital funds? Or even that's limited?
For BNYDC,
Yeah.
we only receive capital dollars from the city.
You do that, or that's all you receive?
Yes, sir.
You. It's, I have no, I'm sorry. Michelle, do you have any questions?
No, sir.
I think they're a fine set of statements. And you've come a long way. There was a time this was,
I remember those days.
and, all right. If there are no other questions, thank you, sir. Really, done well. Feel better.
Thank you.
I give you some typos,
Pardon me?
things you may want. Straighten out.
Go ahead. It's hard to get it. What do we do next week?
Trust for Governor's Island.
The Trust for Governors Island.
Which one, Bernie?
The Trust for Governors Island.
Oh, trust. Mike, you want anotwant another water?
I'll just DOT.
Okay.
It's good to see you again. All the best.
Let's both get up.
Want to take a break a minute, or
We're getting more
just water?
flow through it.
Okay. Where's the young woman who got me the coffee over here? No, I'm okay. It's terrible. I fell about it'll be 3 weeks Friday, and I'm a lot better. but I think I should have gone to the doctor. You can't talk to yourself. You can't. Really slowed me down,
Take care of yourself.
Howie, this is Mr. Khan, isn't it? How are you, sir?
Good morning, sir.
So here's how it works.
Good morning.
Good morning. Just give some people, we'll be ready in a minute. Have a seat, please, and introduce.
Up to 4, up to the Oh, thank you.
Are we ready, folks? Would you kindly introduce yourself?
I'm Leslie Koch, President of the Trust for Governors Island.
I'm Willa Paget, Chief Financial Officer of the Trust for Governors Island.
And I'm Warren Rupel with Marks Panic.
You have a little statement?
I do.
Good.
How are you, sir?
All right. It's a nice place to work, isn't it? On Governor's
Oh,
Island?
yes, I thought where you worked, yes. It
I'm
says-
sorry?
Yeah. It's always a pleasure to be at this committee, and I have the easier task of updating you on everything that's happened since we were last in this room. It's been a very exciting year for Governor's Island. We are near the completion of our comprehensive infrastructure program. So we have potable water on the island, a brand new seawall, new docks, stabilized buildings, and are just completing the last phase of our electrical work, thanks to an extraordinary investment by the City of New York beginning in 2011. In conjunction with that, we also completed wonderful public spaces, which opened 30 acres of new park that opened to the public in 2014, successfully completed our second public season, and are actually ahead of schedule. We are the public sector, so and we announced previously that we would complete the hills, which are the next 10 acres, a vertical park, new hills that rise up to 70 feet in the harbor. We previously announced that we would complete them in December of this year and open them to the public in 2017. But we were pleased to report to the board of our board in January that we are ahead of schedule and will complete them and open them to the public early this summer. So the public sector can do things ahead of schedule, so take that home. And we are working with our first commercial tenant who has not yet begun construction, a destination day spa, a designation that was approved by our board of directors in December of 2013, which represents significant private investment in the island and will result, when they open in future years, in an expansion of our public access and ferry service. So, and you may also be aware that in the state of the city, Mayor de Blasio announced a commitment to redevelopment of the island, and so we expect that there will be a request for proposals for not-for-profit and commercial tenants on the island in our historic buildings and development zones, and that development process, there'll be further details announced later this calendar year. So we have been busy, and then I hope that you are pleased with our financial results, and I will turn it over to my colleagues who have worked very hard in preparing these materials, which have, of course, also been reviewed by our board of directors.
I don't believe I have anything to add to Leslie's introduction. We can take some
In
questions.
percentage terms, what does the government own still, the National Park Service? What do they run and what do you run?
Very good question. The island's 172 acres. 22 acres comprise the Governor's Island National Monument, owned and managed by the National Park Service. The remaining 150 acres are owned by the Trust for Governor's Island.
Any of the remaining?
150.
150, and
Yeah.
they have?
22.
22.
Yes.
You still have the high school on the island?
We do. The Urban Assembly New York Harbor High School, which is a public high school, is now in its 6th year on Governor's Island.
I remember it. Just as an aside, I'm a member of the board of the Health and Hospitals Corporation. Had an education session a few years back, and we went to Governor's Island. was a cold day in October. We nearly froze. So then they said, well, they'll use electric heaters where we are. So they blew the computers, so we couldn't, it was unbelievable.
That was
But
before my
It was
time.
very nice, it was beautiful. There were some beautiful paintings, as I recall.
Yes, yeah.
depicting
I think you were in, yeah.
Revolutionary War battles and whatnot. And
Yes,
I
you were in
imagine
Pershing Hall.
Building many of the buildings and putting in new infrastructure and.
We have stabilized the historic buildings, which include Pershing Hall, the building where you were, and then it'll be the responsibility of the tenants to add things like systems and whatever particular finishes they want for their use. So in the case of the high school, that was an investment by the School Construction Authority. In the case of the Destination Day Spa, it's a private company that will take the responsibility to update those buildings.
And you'll get busy in the summer especially, or in the spring, picnics and the weekends
Yep.
and whatnot.
72 days, Memorial Day
Sorry?
weekend. We open in 72 days, Memorial Day weekend.
And it's free, the ferry, for the people?
The ferry is $2 round trip for adults, but free on weekend mornings and always free for children under 12.
It's a lovely resource to have in the city. And the National Park Service, I mean, they're clearly separate from you. In other words, you know what's theirs and what's yours and
Yes,
whatnot.
I'm not dressed in a park ranger uniform. I'm pleased to
No,
report.
it's hard
Yeah,
sometimes.
yes, no, we work very closely with them and increasingly closely to make sure that we have a seamless visitor experience and that we're also leveraging our expertise in operations and maintenance and capital projects.
The permits and fees, Warren, that you show on the income statement, what are,
Well,
Maybe I can answer that.
there's
So,
events, et cetera, that are helpful.
We have a program which we call Open House GI, and we make available to organizations free space in former officers' homes, 150,000 square feet of space, if they create experiences that are free and open to the public, as well as 25 acres of green space. But we do require them to restore spaces, to have appropriate security. So some of those fees reflect actual expenses that we incurred in behalf of those programs. And then we also receive fees from the food vendors who do business on the island. We have a bike concession program on the island, and we have an entertainment venue. So permits and fees cover all those categories. Willa, is there anything I missed?
The only other item is that the National Park Service pays a fee to the trust also for the services we provide.
It's a nice place for a
ferry
conference.
security maintenance.
Yeah, it's a nice place for a conference, all right.
Does TGI own all of the buildings on the island and plans
Speak
to
up,
lease?
dear.
Does TGI own all of the buildings on the island and plan to lease the space, or do you plan to sell the space to external parties?
We own all of the buildings on the 150 acres, with the exception of one building, which is St. Cornelius Chapel, which is actually owned by Trinity Church. In our business arrangements to date and going forward, there will be triple net leases, so we will continue to own the buildings and the underlying land, but the tenants are responsible for the capital improvements and the costs of operating those buildings.
So that'll be a future revenue flow for...
Exactly, yes. So the revenue, we are not showing in these financial statements any rent revenue or common area maintenance charges, but we expect to have those as income streams in the future.
I noticed that you had something I don't see very often. It's a significant reduction in OPEB, period to period. How'd you manage that?
We previously had,
It's too personal for me to
well, we previously had 2 employees who were eligible for OPEB benefits. One of them left the trust. Now we have 1 person who's eligible for OPEB benefits, and that's the cause
it.
for the reduction.
The other,
No magic.
I'm sorry, just to follow up, the person who left was not vested? The person who left was not vested in those
No,
benefits?
No, he left before meeting the criteria.
Thank you.
the largest single expense I see here is the facilities management contract. Was that competitively bid?
Absolutely. That was competitively procured, and actually, yesterday, we had a board meeting, and we have re-procured that, and we'll have actually a new vendor fulfilling that. But that was competitively procured, the contract that you see, and then again, for a new contract.
How many employees do you have?
We currently have 20 headcount, 20. 20.
20.
I noticed you had a very significant increase in depreciation expense, even more so than seemed proportionate to the increase in your fixed assets. I was wondering if there was some adjustment or catch-up that needed to be made?
No, it was just a matter of moving completed capital projects, or in some cases, partially completed projects with that portion put into service onto the fixed asset schedule. We had close to $130 million that was moved onto the fixed asset schedule in FY15.
Thank you.
So if you got some of these, I'm sorry, if they contributed some of the older buildings to you, the paintings, I remember there was some very beautiful, that's your property now too?
Yes, you were in the one building, actually there are two buildings that are interior landmarked, and the paintings you're referring to, which we are responsible for.
You're responsible for maintaining them,
yes.
for sure.
But the rest of the buildings, the interiors are not landmarked, so our responsibilities for those as landmarks is to prevent further deterioration and ensure that they are stabilized. So most of our investment in historic buildings has been roof repair, some porch repair, repainting as a preventive measure. But those are quite distinctive paintings done during the WPA period.
And who provides security on the island?
Part of our operating expense, we have a contract with MSA, Michael Stapleton Associates, and they staff both the queues that we have in the Battery Maritime Building, because we have a U.S. Coast Guard security plan, so we have to screen an appropriate number of our visitors, queues to get off the island, and other security, and then we work with NYPD and FD on appropriate emergency services, as well as staffing during our peak days. We also pay as part of our operating budget for an ambulance to be stationed on the island during our public access weekends.
And I remember that in the summer months, there's a ferry from Brooklyn as well.
That's correct. So part of our operating budget pays for an additional ferry supplemental service. We increase the schedule from Manhattan, and then we run service from Pier 6 in Brooklyn Bridge Park that operates at a similar schedule and also the same $2 cost for adults.
So all those acres are worth $1, huh?
They were worth $1 and required quite a lot of capital and infrastructure investment. So it depends on how you calculate that.
Yeah. All right. That's a good deal.
Thank
Believe
you.
me.
Every year I say, come visit.
I'm sorry?
Every year I ask you to come visit.
I was there many years ago.
I know.
I'm sure it's beautiful in the summer.
I need an updated anecdote for next year when come to the top of the hills and see the view. It's quite extraordinary.
The sled for snow.
Are there any other questions? All right.
Hey, Warren.
Good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
I got you one.
I think we're done.
The capital T.
Oh, not in this one. Okay.
I'll give it to you.
Okay.
It's very
What page?
capable, this woman.
I think you're putting it in purposely to catch me.
Miss, she forgot something, I think. Take it.
Just in time, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Warren.
I'll give it to you later.
Okay.
Oh, my God. I have no idea. I haven't been to Brooklyn in years.
I
Been to
can take
Brooklyn
it.
Bridge. I
Get
don't
your
know.
passport when you go, Bernie.
No, I don't know it. I mean, really. And there were no deficiencies in the Governor's Island. You had a letter, but there's no management comments.
There were no, there were no comments.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I forgot to ask before.
There were comments in the prior year that were taken care
That you
of.
took care of, yeah, I saw that.
Bridge
Good morning, introduce yourselves, please.
Sure.
Which is the one that has?
I'm Regina Meyer, president of Brooklyn Bridge Park, and
Manny Watkins, CFO of Brooklyn Bridge Park.
And
I'm
of course,
still
Mr.
Warren Rupel from
Rupel
Marks Paneth.
From Marks Paneth, okay. You going to say, you have little statements for us?
I have a small statement. I want to thank you all for having us. And I did prepare a handout which shows some of the progress at the park. So if you could just go, I know we've done this presentation before. The first slide, of course, is the location of Brooklyn Bridge Park within the lower harbor. And then the second slide shows the entire park. So as you could see, the park is in this wonderful location that you could actually see out the window here in the harbor.
Lives in Brooklyn, so you're not far away. Go ahead.
You know, Michelle actually lives nearby.
Very nearby. I was there this weekend.
So the next slide shows the master plan, which emphasizes that the park runs from Atlantic Avenue on the south all the way up to the Manhattan Bridge in Dumbo. And so the wonderful opportunity for this park is to really serve the entire city with this great length of the waterfront. And then the next slide emphasizes what we did last year, since the last time we were here. So in 2015, we opened 2 new sections of the park, John Street and Main Street, and those sections are both located between the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge to the north. And they've proved to be really, really popular. They're actually our location in the park closest to the F train. So we really have a lot of great access to this section of the park. We also opened the Tobacco Warehouse with our partner, St. Anne's Warehouse, which is a theatrical production company, and they've been based in Brooklyn for their entire existence and show a wide range of theater, both indoors and out. And 99 Plymouth Street is actually a former DEP water meter testing facility, which we had the opportunity to renovate and reuse for public restrooms and education. So this was a really great season for us to open these new facilities. The next slide, 2016 openings, emphasizes some of the great things that are happening just in the coming months and the coming warm weather season. 2 important partners will be joining the park. Brooklyn Children's Museum will be opening an outpost. They, of course, will not be moving from Crown Heights, but they will have a small outpost in the bottom of 1 John Street, which focuses on education for small children under the age of 5. And the Brooklyn Historical Society will be opening an outpost. Also, they will not be leaving their wonderful location on Pierpont Street, but they will be doing a 3,000 square foot exhibit on the history of the Brooklyn waterfront in the renovated Empire Stores building, which is a particularly wonderful opportunity for them because Empire Stores is one of the last remaining 19th century warehouses on the Brooklyn waterfront, and they will have the chance to go in depth on life in the 1800s as Brooklyn was growing as one of the major centers of industry in the world. We'll also be opening up our bouldering under the Manhattan Bridge and a marina. So we have a lot going on this year. The next slide, just a couple of slides, focus on some of the great things that happen in the park every year since we've opened in 2010. Volleyball, basketball, roller skating, boating are all things that happen, frankly, at this point as a matter of course in Brooklyn Bridge Park. And the slide on arts and culture emphasizes some of the wonderful partners we've had in bringing arts and really enriching the park to a wide range of audiences. The last few slides focus on how we pay for everything, so that we are at the controller's office. And one of the unique aspects of Brooklyn Bridge Park is that although we are building the park with, at this point, city capital funds, we receive no public funds for our expenses and for our waterfront infrastructure. And we're able to do that because we have approval for the 5 development sites that you see on this sheet. And at this point, I'm proud to let you know that although that we have the funds coming in from One Brooklyn Bridge Park, and in this year will be a milestone year for us because we will be developers will be opening the projects at Pier 1, Empire Stores, and John Street this summer. And so the down payments pilot payments and rent payments, which you see in our audited financials, are derived from these projects and give us the ability to maintain the park and start planning for upgrading our waterfront infrastructure. And then the last slide shows what those developments look like. One Brooklyn Bridge Park is a renovated warehouse that's been up and running since 2010, but the other three slides, Empire Stores, Pier House, and One Hotel, and John Street, are all ground-up projects. Well, Empire Stores is not, it's a renovation, but these are all the projects that are coming online this year, and as my team will explain to you, are reflected in our audited financials. So with that, I will turn it over unless you have some questions.
The one Brooklyn Bridge Park, that was an old building that was gutted and renovated for
Correct.
apartments.
It was originally a warehouse on the waterfront. It was last used by the Watchtower for Bible manufacture
Oh, yes, you'd see it,
and their laundry services. But it's now 1 million square feet of residential use.
How many square feet?
1 million. It's a very large building. It's over.
Empire Stores,
The Empire Stores is a fantastic story. It is a 330,000 square foot Civil War era warehouse. It used to be a part of the Arbuckle Coffee complex that worked out of Dumbo, serving really the entire nation with canned coffee. And it's very famously photographed by Bernice Abbott and Walker Evans in the 30s, so it's very famous in that regard. If that whole site fell into city, first Con Edison and then public hands over the course of the 1960s and 70s, when the Brooklyn waterfront just really, the whole break bulk cargo process really started to recede. So the state of New York held Empire Stores since the 70s. It was incorporated into the park in 2010. We RFP'd the site in 2012. And right now, I'm happy to report that there will be openings in that building for commercial and retail use starting this summer. It will be the headquarters for West Elm, the furniture company that's actually owned by Williams and Sonoma out of California. And but West Elm has always maintained a Brooklyn presence as a part of their company business. So they will be both headquartered there for their office, corporate design, and have a store on the ground floor. There'll also be offices for other tech companies and other restaurants in the building. And as I mentioned earlier, the Brooklyn Historical Society. So I think this is going to be a real success story for adaptive reuse. We carefully worked with both city landmarks and state landmarks to make sure that this building was reused appropriately. So we went both up to Albany and upstairs to make sure we had the best review and process on that. And so it's, I think, a real great success story for taking a public resource that really had not been used for over a half century into reuse.
Excuse me, on the one Brooklyn Bridge Park, the residential, are any apartments set aside for more modest rent for people?
No.
Full.
This is a market rate project that was conceived of totally private. The developer, Robert Levine, bought the building from the Watchtower in 2006, received approvals to move ahead with the residential use. It's in a manufacturing zone, and renovated it for market rate since then.
Financially, I think you're doing very well. I mean, looking at the statements, the pilot payments seem to be pretty substantial. And then there's the permits and the fees. Really, how many people do you have working there in Brooklyn Bridge?
We have 12 people in management and admin, which we've actually started to shrink. And we have a growing operations staff of about...
roughly around 35 people, and then we have some seasonal staff. that we bring in to help with our horticultural needs.
And so those,
So roughly total around 43 people.
They're full-time?
Yes,
They're
full-time.
full-time, all right, they have to be, right. And the capital grants come from the city for the most part?
Correct.
I have a couple of questions apropos.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask Michelle. Michelle, have you ever gone over to look at it? You're so close.
I have been there many times, including this past weekend, and it's wonderful.
It's beautiful, isn't it? I have to get over there one of these days. Go ahead, Bob.
In one place, you say that you have a whole bunch of uninsured cash. That's on page 19. And on the next page, you say you've got a custodial agreement with the bank, which looks to me like it's insured.
Our cash is collateralized by our bank, which is JP Morgan Chase.
So, but if you look at the prior page, you say it's not collateralized.
It's interesting that you asked that, because when
19 and 20.
when I took a look at the wording this morning, I said, Mark Kaplan's going to ask me that question. And I think the connection between the two paragraphs could be made better to indicate
I
that they
think
are.
so, too. Now, where is, oh, you talk about the accrued benefits for, actuary accrued liability for benefits. It's very little. So it's very little. Are you part of the city plan? No. No, it's a separate plan.
Correct.
And so you have an OPEB issue as well. Is it your intention to fund OPEB or carry it the way the city does?
Attention is carried the way the city does.
So it'll never, you won't fund it?
Right.
And the last question I have is that there's a step, someplace in here that you have bankers acceptance and time deposits with assets of $50 million. In today's world, that's a drop in the bucket. And the amount of money you have is more than what the bank has in its capital. I mean, wouldn't prudence indicate if you're going to go into a bank, you're going to a bigger bank?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you repeat it?
You say on page 20 that your investment policy permits you to invest funds in bankers' acceptances and time deposits of banks with worldwide assets in excess of $50 million.
Right, so at the time of this report, we didn't, that's just our investment policy statement. We didn't have any investments at that time.
Okay, but does that mean you could go into that smaller bank?
Yes, we could go into that smaller bank, yes.
Is that a wise thing in today's world?
Well, we are sort of readdressing our investment policy, so it may change going forward.
Okay, I'm not one of you.
You're okay?
Well, it sticks out.
We've kicked off our investments in sort of October of October of 2015.
so that's not shown on this statement.
So that'll be reflected in next year's statement.
Okay.
We have a relationship with Citibank.
That's got more than $50 million.
Yes, yeah.
Question is whether you add it all up, it's really there.
Yeah. Our Audit and Finance Committee, we've been working with them on the investment policy. Our investment policy lines up with the city's investment policy, so it's obviously very conservative, but under the leadership of first Kyle Kimball and then Maria Torres Springer, our Audit and Finance Committee has directed us to start to diversify. So the new accounts at Citibank will be reflected in the next year's audit.
Just a question again on the One Brooklyn Bridge Park. Maybe I'll address this to Warren. They'll pay pilots, I guess, instead of real estate taxes. Is that it?
Correct. There's pilots, and then there's a few other, there's payments in lieu of mortgage recording taxes, a few.
How long, I mean,
Each property is under ground leases. Our lease with the City of New York for our not-for-profit is a 99-year lease. And so each development site has a ground lease from us that lines up with the terms that we have with the City of New York.
for 99 years,
Correct.
they'll pay pilots.
Correct.
They'll never pay real estate taxes.
Correct.
All right, no, it doesn't.
No, so I just...
Oh, it's okay.
There was pilot legislation approved in 2005 between the city and the state After 20 years, that legislation gives the ability for the city to sweep. The real liability for this, for our site, and we'll start to talk, we've been starting to work with our Audit and Finance Committee on that, is that we have a $300 million liability over the next 50 years on our pile and other waterfront infrastructure. And that really is why we are starting to work with our Audit and Finance Committee on carefully planning the expenditure of those funds.
And I guess that'll be true for the Empire stores and the John Street, okay.
Correct.
I'm sorry?
Michelle has a question.
Oh, Michelle, I'm sorry. Oh, Mr.
Why don't you
Khan.
go first?
Go ahead, Mr. Khan. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of comments and questions about some of the things in the MD&A. The first is just an observation and a personal opinion. The variance columns here are in dollars rather than percentage, and to some degree I find the percentages a little bit more useful analytically, so you might want to consider that. There also are some number disagreements, I believe, between MD&A and the statements. On page 5, in the operating expense area, the last sentence of the fiscal 2015 versus 14 analysis, it says that increases in utilities, security, personnel costs, and the staff required to maintain the park have all gone up, but actually repair and maintenance expense went down, which I found interesting, and I was curious why that was when you look in the actual financial statements.
Right, so a lot of the sort of improvements that we make in the park are sort of capitalized, so they wouldn't be reflected in sort of repairs and maintenance. Right, so some of the improvements that we make during the park are capitalized, so they wouldn't be reflected in the repairs and maintenance.
Okay, I wouldn't describe them then as repairs in the MD&A. Also, a little bit further down on the same page, under non-operating revenues, some of the numbers in that first sentence don't seem to agree to the financial statements, such as the 2013 non-operating revenue number, the 39,487, is not the same as what I see either in the MD&A table or on the financial statements. And then the same thing actually in the prior year explanation, the final number in that first line, the 44,460. Again, these are just a little bit off. I think it probably, as some numbers were finalized, the MD&A numbers may not have been updated. And then I had a question on the increase. Now I'm on page 7, the very first sentence under financial highlights. The increase in BVP's total net position is the main source for the change in net position for the year ended June 30th, 15. So I'm not sure if something was left out of that.
Well, the change in that position, it's awkwardly worded, but it's really just the residual. I mean, obviously, it's residual of all the items that were on the statement of activities.
Okay, then I guess it's just an awkward wording.
And we'll take a look. I'm not sure why there may be some number discrepancies in there, but we'll certainly take a look.
Right. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Mr. Khan.
Thank you. So just had a couple questions with regards to on note 5 on page 17, the future minimum ground lease revenues issue report. So we had the Brooklyn Navy Yard was up before you, and they broke down their leases, up to 50 years and expected revenues. And here I see that, you only show up to 2020. I think it would be useful to see what those other revenues are in subsequent years, especially given that Empire Stores has a lease through July 2109. So I'm guessing, so it would be useful to have that type of information, especially when entities are receiving lease agreements for 90 years.
Okay.
Sorry, I missed just one thing, going back to page 5, in the non-operating revenue section, BVP recognizes capital funding as revenue when eligible project costs are incurred. Now, I am less familiar with nonprofit accounting than I am with government accounting, but I'm not sure that's the right treatment for grant revenue, unless these are specifically expenditure-driven grants. So I'm not sure.
That's what they are.
They're expenditure-driven. Great, thank you.
Okay.
So who sets the ground lease level? I mean, who sets how much to pay you?
We, in each development site, set the ground lease level through lease negotiations, which is approved by our board.
So there's someone on your board, or more than someone, who knows, who has a certain knowledge of real estate, I suppose?
Yes, we work, our board is chaired by Alicia Glenn, the deputy mayor for economic development.
Okay.
And we work very closely with New York City EDC on all our financial modeling. Each lease has in it escalations over time and participation. So we can, taking off from Mr. Khan's suggestion, start to talk about the subsequent years in these statements from here on out.
I just have one question on, looking at the ground lease page on note 5 on page 17, and, I was quite interested in your presentation. I also live nearby, but I'm interested in the marina. It wasn't listed as one of your big development sites. I look at the diagram in your slideshow, it's chock full of boats. Walking by there frequently, I don't see many boats. And of course, this time of year, I wouldn't necessarily expect to see many, but what are the plans for the marina, and what type of revenue expectations do you have coming?
We have a marina under a license. It's called the 115 Marina. There's always been a marina in our project, but we've never considered it a major development site because what we did when we never put capital costs into building the marina, so that was a underlying assumption of that deal. We do have this license with them, and we hope that they open in May. If you come by, you will see that some of the floats are already in place.
I walk by like almost every day.
Oh, good. So those are just
from the promenade, so I see very well all the progress.
Oh, great. So the marina has a deal with us, and it's I believe $300,000 a year in rent to us. They also have a commitment to run 1/4 of the marina as a community dock. So the dock that you'll see closest to our picnic area will be available for public boating. So we're really excited about this. This is the first time our park really has a full water component. And I'll be thrilled to take you around once there's actually boats there. I know that they didn't, are going to announce that they'll be home to 2 major East Coast races this summer as well. So I think people are really captivated by boats, so it's very exciting for us.
Great. So it's 115 Marina?
Yeah, because their major investor has that name of that company. I can follow up with a link to that if you want. I'd be happy to.
Please send that to the committee secretary and she'll distribute it.
Yeah, sure.
So how many acres is it in total?
The park is 85 acres in total. And 10% of the land was approved for development, and the remainder is all public use. So at this point, we're about 2/3 open, so there's over, I don't have the exact sheet with me, but I can follow that up with the corporate secretary as well. We have over 50 acres of open space. Each pier, just to give you a sense of scale, are 5 acres. So these are massive piers, some of the largest piers in our harbor, devoted to public use.
Just a caution with the piers, we had Brooklyn Navy Yard in today, and I remember over the years, they said that the marine life and the water eats the piers.
Yes.
I mean, unfortunately, those little animals really eat a lot of wood. So it's something, I mean, that you have to keep in mind in terms of repairs and maintenance, which I'm sure you will. But you're the landlord of a very big site. And the leases, the one Brooklyn Bridge Plaza, it's a rental, it's not co-op or condo.
One Brooklyn Bridge is a condominium, excuse me. And that's that project actually on its basis is different from the others because we were not the landlord of that. That was a privately held site, Watchtower. So that we actually received ground rent and taxes under a sale-leaseback lease.
So they'll get all the revenues from that project? No, the Watchtower.
No, the Watchtower sold it outright. They sold it to Robert Levine for cash.
Oh, he's the developer?
Yes.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated. The Watchtower is selling other properties in Brooklyn at the same time.
Yeah, they still have a lot of property on Brooklyn, the Watchtower?
I'm not sure how much they have left, but I know they've been doing a lot of selling.
They've been moving their operation to Fishkill and also another site in near Tuxedo Park.
Okay.
Both sides of the Hudson.
If there are no other questions, I thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very well.
Oh, great. I'd love to take the committee on a tour, and I'm happy that you're out at the park. So if there's any questions, we'd love to
My wife is too busy.
address them.
Michelle, just some, oh,
He found it. He showed me the differences in the numbers.
okay. So I was figuring it out over here, and I said they'd tie in.
But the description is still little.
I did it.
I just did it while you were talking about it.
Here, Warren.
Single order corrective action plan. Handouts. That's one.
One more thing, is that it?
Yeah, I think you have just one more, the single order.
You gotta get me out of here, mister.
You want to go, are we going into executive session at all today?
But let's do this thing first, huh?
On the boys' room.
Not a good thing to be late for.
Should take a quick break.
I'd like to just keep going.
Should we take a quick break for 5 minutes before we do the single audit? Okay. Think about it. This woman is responsible for a lot of places, for a lot of space. Very competent.
Good things.
Bud regards for the Ciarello with the pension system. I had everything. He's all set. He'll be retiring at the end of the year.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're going to focus on the...
Yeah, in front of you, you have two packages, two black-bound documents. One is our summary regarding the single audit, and the other is a draft of the financial statements of the single audit. And again, the draft single audit financial statements will incorporate the basic financial statements from the city's CAFR, which was approved in October. So if we turn our attention to the smaller of the two documents, please, I will go through high level again what we've done for the single audit for the year ended June 30th, 2015. Again, consistent with prior years, the single audit encompasses not only the the City of New York, but also the DOE, Health and Hospitals Corporation, EDC, and the Municipal Water Finance Authority. For the current year, there was $25.3 billion in federal expenditures, and that references back to the financial statements on page 225. The threshold, which is calculated under the federal requirements for single audit for Type A major programs for this current year, was $37.9 million. And that ties back to page 243 of the financial statements. All in all, there was 40 major federal programs among 16 agencies and 3 component units. In addition, consistent with last year, the State of New York Department of Transportation now requires a single audit as well. There was 4 major programs for the State Department of Transportation, and their threshold for Type A major programs was $3 million, significantly less than the city, and that's predicated upon the total expenditures. If you flip to page 2 of the presentation, you'll see summarized for the last several years the expenditures for the State of New York by year on page 2, and then again, if you flip to page 3, the federal expenditures by year. Please note the difference between the state on page 2 and the federal expenditures on page 3. States is in millions, the feds is in billions.
Where do you get the trillions?
Yeah, true. No. We go to page 4, again, very high level, but as noted on page 1, this is just a summary. 37.9 million is the threshold. 30 Type A programs were audited, except 1. And then we used 11 Type B programs as major programs. There were 4 major programs for the State Department of Transportation. And if you skip to page 5 and 6 respectively, those are the 40 major programs that were audited for the current year. And then on page 7 are the 4 major programs that were audited for the State of New York Department of Transportation.
Could I just stop you for a minute?
Yes.
According to page 6, the federal expenditures for fiscal year 2015 were $24.8 billion.
Correct.
When you look at the 2015 CAFA, the categorical expenditures was something like 6.8 or 7 billion. So that means there was 17 billion off?
Yes.
It's the Medicaid piece of it.
Pardon me?
Medicaid, Bernie.
For, I know Medicaid is the largest, clearly. So you had Medicaid and HHC?
17 billion comes out.
And this won't tie to the financial statement because these are the major programs that were audited. So there is a disconnect in the total dollar.
It would be nice, I don't know if the controller should do it, if you should do it, in the future, if there was a little reconciliation. In other words, that would show the federal grants for the CAFA, the federal grants and this agency, and I mean, it's a big number. There has to be a lot of all other, but some attempt to reconcile the two.
Okay.
I have and again, with the Medicaid, is that just the federal portion?
Yes.
A problem with the number. I think it's too large. Go ahead.
On page 8 are the 4 reports that accompany the single audit, which is the bigger package. The first is our independent auditor's report on the basic financial statements, which was previously issued back in October. This one, however, will make reference to government auditing standards. The second is the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting, for which we had no deficiencies. The third is the independent auditor's report on compliance on each major federal program, as well as internal control over compliance. On this particular report, which is located on page 213 and 215 of the bigger package, we did have 16 compliance deficiencies and 6 significant deficiencies as it related to the internal control compliance, which is consistent with what we've seen in prior years. And then lastly, the fourth report is the independent auditor's report on the compliance for each major federal state program, which again is the Department of Transportation. On this particular report, we have 1 deficiency, and it is deemed a material weakness as it relates to that particular finding. On page 9, you'll note there's 6 significant deficiencies by CFDA number, and those are the same numbers, 2015-3, 5, 7, 10, 15, and 16, that are respectively shown in the opinions. On page 10 is a graphical depiction of year over year how the total findings, which includes both the federal and the state, you had 16 federal and 1 state, reconcile. So for this year, you had 17 findings, and again, one of which relates to the state, is deemed a material weakness. And comparatively speaking, year over year, it's relatively consistent given the volume of grant monies that you do receive. On page 11, you have the new findings for 2015. These are findings that previously weren't in the prior findings in question costs. And then lastly, on page 12, there are those findings that were previous year findings that have been addressed during the current year or not repeated due to the fact that the agencies were able to remediate and address the findings. And then in the draft report that you have on your desk, on page 225, there was an item that was highlighted in yellow because at the time when we were going back and forth with the various parties involved in preparing the draft financial statements, there was a question as to whether or not the $144 million and the $65 million are going to be included on the consolidated. Those numbers are coming out. That was an actual typo, I would say, or something that was being addressed collectively amongst the parties.
Those are the ones you highlighted in yellow is...
Yes, so the number that will show on the consolidated schedule of federal awards will be the $542,430,000. And that's the number ultimately that will roll into the data collection form, which George will have to sign, and then we have to sign and remit to the Federal Clearinghouse.
And you got an October 29 date on this thing.
October 29th, that is correct. That's when the single audit was completed. It coincides with the
But
audit.
your opinion letter is going to be delivered sometime this month?
That's correct, because the CFA...
Isn't that kind of weird to say?
We were waiting, Marcus, you know, the CFA, the Schedule of Federal Awards, that's not prepared until very late in the...
I'm not questioning, I'm only saying, why shouldn't the date on this?
That's the date of the completion of my audit. That's when the work was done, so that's
I
what...
remember, I've asked that question
Yes,
before.
but
I
that's-
apologize. Still don't like it. But
And this is required to be filed statutorily by the end of the month.
Do the various, I guess it's federal OMB, do they question any of these numbers? Do they contact?
They do. As soon as it's remitted, the feds will do what we affectionately call a desk review, Bernie, whereby they will actually look at what's uploaded into the system, and they check it against the financial statements, and we receive a letter, as does George, clearing the desk review. And then they've also come out numerous times while we've been your independent auditor and reviewed the work papers as well as the CFA. The last full review was done, I believe, 2011? 2010. Tammy Brown from the IG's office came out and reviewed everything, and then we've had subsequent reviews.
It's a very good job, as always, but I have a question always on the medical assistance program. It's very hard to get a number. No, I'm serious, to get what this is costing the federal government. And it seems incredible that it's $17 billion in the city, right? That's just the city. Of course, being on the HHC board, there's a program that's new, it's hard to remember the acronym, it's DSRIP, where they're supposed to get funds for discharge planning, and it arises from the fact that the state cuts to Medicaid saved the federal government a lot of money, so they're giving back some of this money. But nowhere is it $1.7 billion. I think they've spoken about statewide $50 billion. I guess what I'm saying is, and I don't blame you, I think it's a very hard number to get your hand around. I'm sorry to, it just seems to be incredibly difficult. And there's no question that the rate cuts enacted by Governor Cuomo has cost the corporation a lot of money and clearly saved the federal government a lot of money. And given some of the financial problems the corporation has, they're going to be giving back. At the same time, some of the voluntary hospitals who also service a lot of Medicaid patients also want a piece of the action, for want of a better term. It's a frustrating program, and yet it's an important program. I'm just venting. I mean, I'm not. It just seems incredible that it was that big. It just does. How much do you think of that number was HHC? Do you have that anywhere?
Yes. schedule.
I mean,
If you
if
turn in the big package, Bernie, do you have it, Joshua?
Of the
Page
17.
235, Bernie.
The big one?
Page 235.
Exhibit 2?
What is it, dear?
235.
235?
Also, as a side note, in addition to the change that Glenn had mentioned, there'll be additional changes on the consolidated schedule to reflect some aggregation of pass-through
Where do
amount.
we see it here?
So there will be other
So she's saying
changes
that
to the
all the
numbers on the
time?
consolidated schedule.
You see, it's only
Is it 8?
There's too many grant numbers besides everything else that makes it difficult.
Eight.
But,
is 893,778.
pardon me?
The number is 93.778.
What page?
The CFDA number,
236.
What?
236.
236.
93778.
yeah,
Medicaid
small.
program, right here. 8.
Whatever it is, it may be
It's
big, but
very-
it's not enough,
Not enough.
No, it's,
not nearly enough to deal with the needs. And the state and the feds, it's too much of here that you get out of a sense of punitive nature of the behavior of the federal government and to some extent the state. That's the sad part of it from my point of view.
well, the Medicaid program in the city is run by the state.
Yeah.
They set the rates and whatnot. Many years ago, the city would have to budget the city share of Medicaid, the state share, and the federal share. It was a nightmare, because till you collected the money, you had to do seasonal borrowings. Somewhere in the early 80s, if my memory doesn't fail me, the state came along with a very good system, the MMIS system,
Yes.
where they only bill the city for its share of Medicaid. Somehow, trying to relate that city share to the total share, if we could get our hands around it, I think it would be very, very valuable, because you get all kinds of numbers. I'm not criticizing, it's a very big program.
I think HRA has
Speak up, sir.
HRA has a controls over Medicaid number from the state, 17 billion.
All right, they've always did.
Didn't they, George?
You understand what I'm saying? It's a very, very big number, and
While we're talking about big numbers, can you help me out? I assume that on page 245, the 3 zeros in paren are missing there, because I can't believe it's on only $178,000. So something's missing here, am I right?
245?
Yeah.
Yes.
3 zeros are missing.
The zeros are missing. So you gotta fix that up, huh?
Yeah.
And then I have a little parochial question, because I was the chairman of the audit committee of the Board of Ed. What is this non-discrimination poster that's on the child nutrition program?
What page, Mark?
It's nothing to do with 255.
Oh, the findings of course and costs.
Civil rights enter into feeding children.
I really do, I've been saying it all
I'm just
along.
curious.
That's a federal compliance requirement,
I understand, but what is it?
that we don't discriminate against.
Against children in the line that goes to get the lunch?
Yeah.
The worst part of that whole thing is that the children don't want to be known as getting a free lunch, and they don't take the lunch. That's the discrimination. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff that's in there that nobody's figured out how to deal with for years. You ever want to watch a little kid go through and turn down lunch because he doesn't want to be known that he's on welfare?
My recollection from
Michelle.
my recollection from my son's elementary school is that if a certain proportion of the children are eligible, they just make it free for all of the kids.
That's right.
To avoid that problem.
They did, they solved that problem, but there are other, it's so sad.
take this with me. I want to show it to some of the people at HHC.
I take it from what you said, Glenn,
That makes sense.
No,
that the performance of the city, where you have all these things you picked up, is within tolerable bounds, given the vast array of things that have to be done here.
Agreed, without a doubt.
So if you read this and don't understand that, you get a book full of not-so-good things, is there some way of indicating that the error rate, or whatever we want to call it, is within tolerable bounds? I know that's hard for you to say.
The hard part is, in that question mark, is tolerable bounds. There are no tolerable bounds within the federal government. I mean, unfortunately, when it's a finding in question cost, it's just that.
Yeah.
If it's $10, they would sit there and say, did you comply or did you not comply? And therefore, in the findings in question costs, we would document what the dollar amount was, or we would say cannot be determined. But if you were to go out and look at the federal clearinghouse and compare how you did to other major cities, you can clearly tell that the city is far ahead of the curve as far as the levels of, or the number of findings, given the size of the funding that you received. So, but there's nothing that I can say per se. I mean, we can sit there and, we've said it in.
You just said it enough to satisfy me as a committee member.
So.
The city does a pretty good job.
And we've always said that, given the magnitude of, putting this together and the number of agencies, George and his team, OMB, the Comptroller's Office, I mean, it's a collective effort.
Is there some place in that which accompanies all this stuff that can be said? Not by you.
I mean, that's up to management. I mean, you can.
If you're not accustomed to reading these things, you look at this book and you see all these things and you say, oh my goodness, it looks terrible. And if you've read them enough and heard what you say, well, we do a damn good job. Is there some place we can beat our drum that way?
We have not considered that. We certainly could consider that. I do think it's worth saying, however, that the audience that generally reads these documents is an audience that are of people familiar with these documents.
I understand that, but someday it could be somebody like one of our presidential candidates picks this thing up and says, my God, they don't know what they're doing.
Correct.
I would hope that's not the case, given it's their rule set, but.
May I ask another question? As you are well aware, the uniform guidance is gradually becoming effective for your audit work and also for the city's grants as new grants are issued that comply with the new standards. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what issues, if any, you see, or if it seems to you that agencies are prepared or not prepared.
I just have a finding in the back, 15 and 16. In the subrecipient contracts, you have a lot of subrecipient, like ACS has about 400. HRA has a lot of subrecipient. And I think those contracts needs to be updated according to the standards. Now, standard says I got 14 different elements to be in the contracts. And somebody has to go through the contracts and make sure that all these 14 elements are in these contracts. Otherwise, and the federal government, in the uniform guidance is a must. Must means is a law. If it's there or there, otherwise it'll create finding. In this year, we found one case where the contract is not updated for the subrecipient. The second thing was the procurement contracts. They have the same elements, has to be in the contract to make sure it's a federalized contract. So I would say these are the two main areas city needs to just, I'm sure they have done with the procurement, but I'm not sure with the subrecipients.
And that's, we've had conversations with our clients, and a lot of them are still coming up to speed. You were impacted because it was a stub period and there wasn't a lot. However, when we did meet with them regarding those contracts, their attorneys were involved too, because there's a big undertaking in rewriting those contracts, Michelle. So it's important to have the attorneys involved on the contracts.
And you're not, I mean, in what you've seen so far, it doesn't seem like agencies have taken those steps or are aware they need to take those steps, or mix?
I would say with subrecipient. Yeah. I don't think so they have.
Okay.
Yeah, because the audit.
Okay, so I guess.
I sit on two boards where the absence of monitoring of subrecipients, when the Inspector General's got a hold of us, cost each of these two enterprises, which are much more in the city, over $1 million each in cleanup and penalties. So monitoring the subrecipients is a hot button
Yes.
in some areas. I mean, I forgot to mention I had that.
And
I ran the investigations.
And most of the subrecipients are in ACS and ACS and I think ACS.
Well, I had a bitter experience with it twice.
Yeah. It's more than 400 subrecipients. The other big change coming in this report next year, you have to have a column for subrecipients. How much money is went to the subrecipients. So that's addition to this report next year.
Well, what they got us on is the fact that we didn't get the subrecipients to do what they should have done.
Well, that's the financial, the oversight and everything. A lot of times, those reports aren't remitted to the person who passed it along, and therefore you're at fault.
Yeah, and it was, as I say,
That's common, and we've had that too before, and, you know, George and Darshan have dealt with that finding as well. I mean, that's common practice.
And within the subrecipient, the biggest change is you need to do a risk assessment. You mean city has to have a risk assessment for all the subrecipient on an annual basis, of whatever the criteria you have to use based on the history, the findings, all the subrecipient, but you need to have a risk assessment of all these subrecipient. You also need in your contract that you can send your personal auditors to
if they
view
don't
the
do
books
it.
and record of subrecipient. Yeah. These are
It's very tricky.
No, looking again at the medical assistance, I don't mean to dwell on it, but you're saying it's 17 billion, or someone is saying it. That's just the federal share, so I guess the all-fund share would be like 35 billion? You know, when you add in the state and the city portion?
Don't know.
I think that's fair, right?
Don't know offhand.
the report we get from the state, I think is a
I'm sorry?
is a federal.
Just, yeah, don't know offhand.
Am I right? It's close enough.
And it
That'd be
does
fair.
not include the state and city contribution.
How many Medicaid recipients are there in the city? Billion? I don't think so.
And I was looking at an HHC report. I think it's around 2.5 to 3 million.
The number doesn't sound right to me, the 17 billion, I'm sorry. I've been complaining about it for the longest time, with due respect. You get all,
No, I'll have to call her back. Bye.
as I say, somewhere in HHC, I've heard a number of 50 billion statewide in Medicaid expenditures.
But that may include
So
the
they-
federal share, the state share, and the local share for the whole state. And these numbers are just the
That
federal portion.
reconciliation, we really need that reconciliation, it's too big a number. And it's a lot.
Mr. Chairman, we can try
many-
and
how
work
many
with the Office of
recipients
Management and Budget on that.
How many Medicaid recipients are there in the city? A billion? I don't know.
2.5 to 3 million.
What?
I was saying 2.5 to 3 million.
A Medicaid recipient, sir?
Yes. I can, exact number.
Then it's possible. Then it's possible. It's a big program. Do they question it, the feds, when you send us?
Well, the feds will look at the report if they have
Yeah,
any questions. I mean, they do come out.
Yeah,
City, I mean, clearly they've had some disallowances
I
in
think
the
they've
past.
shot
I mean,
themselves in the foot with all the CFDA numbers. I really mean it. I think they've shot themselves in the foot. There's so many CFDA numbers. They must go crazy trying to, I mean, do you give them a summary like you gave us, or no?
No, they get the full package with the data collection form, which is electronic and submitted.
Must take them a year and a half to go through it.
No, actually,
No.
they're rather quick.
it's-
Because it's electronic, it's uploaded electronically,
So-
and everything's in there in a prescribed format where they can go through and do their desk review. Typically, once the report's been loaded, I mean, within a month, they've done a desk review already, which has identified any major issues.
And so if there's any issues, they will call you within a month or two, is that it?
Letter.
And a
Yes,
letter.
we get a letter, George gets a letter.
This report is submitted to something known as the Federal Clearinghouse. And essentially what they get is an Excel spreadsheet that lays out all of the expenditures by CFDA number. Those CFDA numbers are coded in such a way that they relate to specific federal agencies. And so what you can do is, once they receive the report, they can carve up their piece and send out the dollar values that relate to the federal agency, along with a hard copy of the report. What in turn happens is, the individual federal agency that receives that information contacts us, either saying that they have no issues or they have specific questions, and they'll request additional follow-up. And that's been happening fairly routinely now for a number of years.
And the question is more on the numbers or on those that are not meeting the requirements?
So the questions, they can vary, but primarily they relate to the findings. So in this package are those
findings,
17
okay.
findings, and they want to know
So they just
specifically-
load the CFDA data from year to year?
Yes.
They can compare. All right. And sir, Mr. Khan, you said there were 2.5 billion Medicaid recipients?
2.5 million to 3 million. I'm looking it up right now.
Pardon me?
I'm looking it up right now.
2.5 million.
That was my recollection, but
Yeah.
I will look at
All
it.
Okay.
It's a big program. Very nice job, really, Glenn, as always, and a nice job. And George, thank you. Do you want to go through any of the findings, folks? I mean,
Glenn, you want this?
are they very serious? Which ones would you want us to focus on, Glenn, on the findings?
The findings, Bernie, I think are self-explanatory. I mean, clearly,
Yeah,
George is working with the agencies. I mean, everything's been discussed with the agencies prior to the exiting of the audit. So, I mean, you can go through them, or
I looked at
we're
them
fine
last
with the
night on the
responses.
computer at
We're,
home.
you know, in agreement with the management responses, and any edits you have, Mark, I'll take.
I got little bits and pieces.
That's fine.
George, you got cooperation?
Absolutely,
Yeah, all
absolutely. Agencies are very responsive.
Okay?
All right.
You have to take a motion.
Thank you again.
You have to take a
If I threw this at you, Glenn, I'd knock
Oh,
things
yes,
over.
yes, yes. Our secretary reminds me, just as the regular audit, we have to have a motion to accept the single audit.
I so move. Hey,
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Very nice job.
Sign your death warrant, that's what you I just, when I went on the night shift board, my general counsel handed me a letter I had to get.
Are we going into?
2 pages.
I'll see you over
I
there.
probably should have done one from the
We have
city.
nothing planned.
No. Take a motion. So what
All right,
Practice law. for
again, if we
tonight.
have nothing, we have nothing planned for the executive session?
I don't think so, no.
To adjourn, okay, thank you all.
Second.
Okay, thank you. It can't be.
Jackie, I'm gonna leave stuff on the table, I never wanna see it again.
Sorry? Yeah, leave it.
I never wanna see this again. Now, here for you.